Good afternoon and welcome back to our live webinar here at First Baptist Jackson, Navigating Through Life's New Normal. Once again, we have two of our counselors from Summit Counseling Ministry, Shannon Collins and Don Waller, who are going to be here to help us with our topic today. I do want to remind you that you see a number there at the bottom of your screen, and you are free to text in questions to us. I want you to know that question will be absolutely anonymous. We will not know who sent that question. And those questions are submitted to someone who's sitting here in the sanctuary, who will then in turn send it to my phone, and we'll be able to answer your question live on our webinar today. Now today our topic is going to be on helping adults deal with grief. This is kind of part two of dealing with grief. A few weeks ago we talked about how to help our children deal with grief as they've lost many of the activities that they love to do, the ability to be with friends like they enjoy. But we realized that as adults, we're grieving as well. And so I just kind of wanted to begin with, I guess maybe a little bit of a personal testimony and how I've been experiencing some of that myself. Just, I don't know, maybe about a week to 10 days ago, one of my very best friends in life passed away suddenly. And, it was difficult enough to lose a really close friend. But then to realize with this COVID-19 pandemic that I wouldn't be able to attend the funeral. It was a family-only funeral, as funerals have to be right now. And so I know that there are other people who are watching this webinar right now who've experienced the same thing. We hear stories all the time. Life continues to move on, and death continues to move on. It doesn't stop for a pandemic. But it affects the ability to, I know in my case, to kind of say a goodbye. It affects the ability to have closure and to grieve in a way that you normally would.
Yes.
So what would you say to somebody, like in my case, who has lost somebody that they love, they appreciate, a friend, a co-worker, and where they haven't been able to have the normal closure of being able to go to a funeral? What would you say to a person who's grieving in that way?
I think we're so used to doing the things that we're used to doing that we really are kind of at a loss, for what do we do now. And so I think we have to think outside the box a little bit more and be a little more creative and do some of the things like we had discussed, doing things like sending cards, just trying to make calls, even if we can't be present with our physical body. What else can we do? Some families ask for donations. We can send a donation to where they've asked, and we can go on websites for funerals and say messages where they allow the public, they share. We can do things like that if we can't attend the service.
And I think too, I agree with that. I think reaching out to other friends that knew your friend and talk about, man, this is really hard. And it's not being able to go and have some closure here and just talk therapy. Talk about the difficulty of not feeling what's normal. We're trying to decide this is all different, and we're all trying to navigate what is normal. So finding something that works for you, because everybody grieves differently. And learning something that helps you have some closure. And I think reaching out to the family in any way you can, praying, asking God to help give you some words to say and just some thoughts about, hey, we had some good times together. These are some memories I had of our friendship.
You make a good point that people grieve in different ways. At the same time, there are different reasons for grief.
Right.
And so I gave an example of a death of a friend, but we just realized that there are a lot of people who have lost their jobs. There are business owners who have had to close their businesses. And I can only imagine the grief that they must be experiencing. On top of the grief, of course, the worry of how they're going to make ends meet and what life will be like if and when things get back to normal, or if they ever will. And so what would you say to the person who's grieving as a result of a loss of a job or having to close a business?
I think coming to see a therapist would be a good option, but really being able to share with where you are in that grief, in that loss, what you're not able to do, and then think about what you can do. Do the next best thing. Maybe it's time to do some extra training. Maybe it's to buy a book. Maybe it's to look at changing a career. There's opportunity here right in loss, or right in this coronavirus that's calling us this pandemic that's changing everything we know. It doesn't mean that we can't figure out something different, but it means we have to be a little bit open and, being able to change gears, being able to be open to what God may be, what door could be opening through all of this. Because, eventually we will get past, and we will get back to whatever normal is.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that if we can look at, again, what can we do? I think sometimes if we get our focus on, I can't do this, and I can't do that, and I can't do this, then that kind of takes us down emotionally. It takes us down. So like Don said, looking at the positives, looking at, okay, what can I do? And in certain ways, just to stop the bleeding. Can I put a Band-Aid here? Can I get this to work for now until this turns? And like he said, hopefully this is going to turn soon if we can just hold on to the hope that we're not going to be in this place forever. Yeah. And what things can I do? And I agree with him that we can reevaluate and say, is this a time where I really needed to make a change anyway? Is this a time that I needed to do something different, and this has just kind of forced my hand? And trying to discern, is it time to change gears, do something different?
That's a good point, and I guess what I'm hearing you say is you kind of have to have a little bit of change in a mental direction.
Yes.
I know I find myself sometimes when you're going through a difficult time, it just seems like everything is stacked against you, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Feels that way.
Feels that way.
You go through a difficult situation, then you get a stay-at-home order. And it's like, well, great, now that's just
Right.
gotten worse.
Yeah.
Or, you think about this past weekend and just the horrific tornadoes that hit our
Yes.
state.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is tornado season, and so normally they're always terrible, but you know that tornadoes are going to come from time to time. But there's a part of it that goes, seriously, now? I mean,
exactly.
we're already dealing with this COVID-19, and now you're dealing with a tornado? And so it just seems like sometimes you can never catch a break, and you just get pounded and pounded and pounded. But what I hear you saying is sometimes you need to accept what is, but then you also need to change the way you think about the things that you're experiencing. Am I hearing you right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I think perspective. And if your perspective is, okay, we will get through this. Things may be different, and I'm not sure what those different is, but I'm willing to go for it because I know God is in control. I think it's easy to get overwhelmed. It's easy to feel hopeless. But what we do when we feel that way is do the next thing, the next right thing that you can do.
Yeah.
Whether that's get up and take a shower, whether that's FaceTime a friend, whether that's reach out to a family member, realize that you do have options.
Right.
Yeah, and like you said about focus, turning it to what am I thankful for? If we keep looking at what all we've lost and what all we can't do, like I said, it takes us down. Even the most positive of people, it takes us down. So I think it's a matter of disciplining our minds to say, okay, well, I'm also going to stop and say, what am I thankful for? And for some people who have been through so much and lost so much, you start with the basics of I'm alive today, I'm breathing, I have whatever it is, my children, just the very basics. I can walk, and forcing our minds to turn in that direction rather than being taken down by the negativity. And I think that's what's so good about counseling. I have people, even in this pandemic time period, where we'll do a phone session. And at the beginning of the phone session, I hear they're so down and they need such water just poured into their hearts. There's just a drought there. And by the time we finish our conversation and they've heard from another perspective and they've had hope kind of shed some light and hope into their situation, by the end of the conversation, they're like, I never thought of it like that, or I never saw that before. And you feel them lifting. You
Yeah.
feel it. And you
Yeah.
can actually, in person, see it, but you can hear it even on the phone, them lifting. So it's okay to need help. It's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to share with someone, even a friend, if it's not a counselor, to say, I'm not doing well and I'm upset, and this, and this, and this is all bad, so that they can give you some encouragement.
It's a great point, and I want to come back to that phone counseling in a few minutes.
Okay.
But there certainly seems to be a spiritual warfare element.
No doubt.
And pandemic, I don't believe pandemic is spiritual warfare. I don't believe that weather disasters so much are spiritual warfare as much as what goes on in our minds when we experience
Yes.
those things
Yes.
that are a part of life.
Yes.
No doubt.
And I oftentimes think of, Adam and Eve in the garden. The spiritual warfare there in the garden was essentially the enemy trying to cause Adam and Eve to doubt God.
Yes.
And he did it through getting them to focus on the one thing they couldn't have.
Right.
Absolutely.
God had given them the garden and said, you can eat of every tree in the garden with the exception of one, but the enemy caused them to focus on the one instead of
Yes.
everything else. And
That's
so do
right.
you see that that's kind of
Perfect.
kind of what we go through
Absolutely.
with our minds?
Yes.
Yes.
And redirecting, okay? When you redirect, you take your focus on what you can't change and focus on what you can change.
Yeah.
God tells us to take captive every thought. He says, renew your mind. Maybe you can't go down and do anything for the tornado victims, but you can pray for them. And
Right.
if you know somebody in that area, you can reach out and contact and say, hey, just checking
Right.
in, see if you're okay. So feeling that powerlessness can be overwhelming, but not doing anything about it is your fault. You can do something about it by getting on your knees, by reaching out, by checking on people. And I just think realizing that, hey, God desires for us to trust Him through this.
And I think another tool of the enemy certainly is isolation.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The enemy's tool is to get us to think that we can't do anything, or to think that nobody's ever experienced what we're experiencing, and nobody can help, and nobody wants to help.
Right.
But that's part of spiritual warfare, and that's
Yes.
Exactly.
we have to see that.
Yes, and knowing that we all fall into that need of encouragement. We all fall into that spiral at times of that thought coming in and taking root. We can't help the thought. I mean, it's going to come. We just have that responsibility to do something with it after that. Turn it, change it.
Yeah. I have a question that was submitted, and you addressed it a little bit, but I want to make sure that we address this question. And the question is, I have a friend who has lost a loved one to coronavirus and now lost a friend to the tornadoes over the weekend.
Wow.
I don't even know what to do to help them in this social distancing season. Do you have any suggestions? It's a great question.
It is.
I think, obviously, first thing you can do is pray for them. Second thing you can do is reach out and say, is there anything physically I can do for you? Can I
Yes.
send you something? Do you need a gift card somewhere? Do you need somewhere to stay? Can I meet some of your physical needs first? And let them know that you're praying for them. Let them know that you're checking on them. Let them know that you care. That can be so helpful in a time of uncertainty like we're in right now.
Yeah, again, if we keep thinking, well, I can't do anything for them, that's what the devil wants us to,
Absolutely.
like you said, in spiritual warfare, he wants us to think, well, there's nothing I can do, so we do nothing.
Yeah.
When in reality, maybe they really needed that phone call that day. Maybe they really needed that card in the mail. Maybe they really needed, like Don said, somebody to send them some gift cards so that they don't have to worry about food and they can drive through. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe they really needed one of those things, but if we sit back with our mindset and say, well, in this pandemic, I can't do anything, then that's, that keeps the Lord from working. We can still show our love even if we can't go to them.
Yeah. I have a question for you. You had mentioned people grieve different ways, okay? If I'm talking to somebody and I know that they're grieving, I know they're going through a difficult time, how can I recognize the way that they grieve? Because I may grieve a certain way, and so then I may try to lead that other person to grieve the way I grieve.
Right.
That's right.
But,
That's
but,
normal.
but
yeah.
they don't do it that way.
Right.
Exactly.
So do you have any tips on how to recognize the way a person grieves and how to help them grieve in a way that's beneficial for them?
Ask them if they're keeping their daily routine. Are they getting enough sleep? Are they eating? Are they checking on, their pets? Are they doing the things that they need to do that they normally do? Because sometimes when you go through grief, it knocks you off your balance. You're out of balance. And so just ask them certain questions and say, hey, I'm concerned, or I'm interested in making sure you got me if you need anything. Here's my phone number. Call me. But then checking in on them, because a lot of times when you're in grief, you don't realize how stuck you are. And those questions can be very helpful.
And there's, some common stages of grief that probably we've heard through the years that, you can have the feeling of shock, and denial. You hear people say things like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe he's gone, or those kind of phrases. And that shock and denial is part of grief. And then you hear anger. I'm mad. I'm so mad, that this happened. And then you hear people, with depressing thoughts. I don't know how I'm going to make it now. Words like that. And bargaining. Lord, why did you do this? And couldn't you have done that? And then a sense of acceptance that hopefully, in absorbing the grief that we get to eventually. But when I was young, I thought, okay, well, those are the stages. So you go through them like this, okay, well, I'm through with shock and denial. That's not how it works. We go in and out of that. And it kind of flows. Some days we might feel shocked, and then we might go to depression, and then we might go back to anger. And so if you see people showing signs of anger, depression, shock and denial, things like that, you think that could be grief that they're dealing with in the loss. And so you just normalize it for them and say, it's okay that you're sad. It's okay that you're angry. It's okay that you're depressed. This is part of grief. We're going along, we're doing fine sometimes, and whoosh, it hits us like a wave from the ocean. We think we're doing okay sometimes, and then that hits us. And people will say, well, what's wrong with me? Nothing. That's part of what happens in grief. It's normal.
Yeah.
So helping them to understand it can sometimes be, and not seeing it as a progression that happens like this. We kind of flow in and out of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Getting some good questions submitted. I want to make sure that we get them. I know that sometimes the way we handle grief maybe is not the most productive, right?
Right.
And so a question that was submitted is, do you have suggestions for handling eating addictions during this time?
Well, be aware of it. Be honest. Admit to yourself you have an eating problem. And then if you really want to keep up with how much you're eating, keep a journal. This is what I've eaten today. And be able to share that with the therapist, and be able to share that with somebody who cares, and say, I need some help you watching what I eat. Get somebody to go to the grocery store. Make sure you're not overbuying. Because I think right now the panic is we're going to run out of food, so we're all overbuying.
Right.
And I think that can be an issue, and having too much food in the house to eat and not being able to say no.
So some built-in boundaries.
Yes, setting boundaries, no doubt.
Yeah, and like you said, accountability, saying, I'm struggling with this. This is one of the things I'm doing for coping, and I know it's not healthy. Can you help me with it, with people who are in your household? And like you said, people who are getting the groceries and things like that. Don't let me buy up more than I need to buy up. And really, it can be any kind of, it's what we turn to in the coping. I mean, it can be, some people it's alcohol. I heard that alcohol sales are out the roof. And I think that's because more people are at home and they're drinking to cope. So I think being careful about what we're using to cope. Because for some people it might be eating, for other people it's drinking alcohol.
Yeah. Another question that was submitted, can you discuss a person who lives alone during this particular time? How can I keep my mental health while all alone?
I think that's a great question. First thing I would suggest is let's get on a routine. Let's go to bed at the same time. Let's get up at the same time. Take your shower, get dressed, have activities planned for that day. Have things that you look forward to. If it's getting out in the yard and planting some flowers or planting a garden, tomato plant, go do that. If it's FaceTiming a friend, checking on a friend, FaceTiming a child or a grandchild, and thinking about somebody that could be in that needs a touch. And feel like you're giving back instead of letting it come at you. You're doing something about it. You're being proactive. But I think getting on a schedule and having a routine is very helpful when you're alone, because isolation and darkness, that's where the mold grows, that's where Satan works. And you've got to get out and try to be as active as you can to overcome that aloneness.
Yeah, I think using some of the technology we have today, get someone, if you don't know how, get someone to teach you how to use, the things we have, Zoom and FaceTime and House Party and things like that. We did House Party in our family, and 6 or 7 of us talked at once. And so for the ones who are alone, that was wonderful for them. They felt like we were all together, and also not only using the technology, but also thinking of others before ourselves. Again, what can I do for the people down the road? Is there an elderly family down there that I could, carry them some brownies? Or is there someone that I know that they don't go to the store themselves, they don't need to? Maybe I could go to the store for them instead of sitting there again, keeping the focus on, I'm alone, I'm alone. And every day you telling yourself that is just taking you further down. So if you say, okay, I'm by myself, but what can I do? You can still take something to someone's house and leave it on the doorstep, almost be, Santa's elf that day, changing our focus again.
Yeah, I always like to use NATs, negative automatic thoughts. Know what you're thinking, know what's going through your head. Be aware of that, because that can really change your whole attitude and outlook on life.
Yeah, instead of
NATs, negative automatic thoughts. I like that.
And instead of every day thinking, I'm alone, start saying, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. I'm going to get on House Party with my family. I'm going to get on Zoom. I'm not alone. Telling yourself you're not alone. You're telling yourself, because whatever our perspective is, that's our truth.
Yes.
And so telling ourselves, I can do something for somebody today.
That's a great point. I had a deacon in Biloxi used to say, what is perceived is oftentimes believed.
That's right.
So that makes me think of that. Let me flip the script for a minute.
Okay.
So we've talked about the person who is alone, and your advice is do something.
Yes.
Think of somebody, do something for somebody else, call somebody, FaceTime somebody, okay?
Yes.
Now let's flip the script to a person who may not be experiencing that kind of a grief right now. And so I guess I'm thinking from a pastor's perspective, from the role of the church during times like this. What can a person do to help someone who is grieving, right? Because I think, for instance, you talk about FaceTime somebody, right? Well, I don't like to FaceTime, and so somebody may FaceTime me, and it's a person who is alone, and I don't want to answer it because I don't like to FaceTime, right?
Right.
But don't I have a responsibility to look out for the interests of others and not just for myself? In very much the same way you're giving that advice to a person who's alone.
Yes. Yeah, I think what you're saying is it may not be as important to us, because I've got 5 people in my house right now.
Right,
You've got
right.
5 people in
That's
your
right,
house.
that's right.
Donna's too. So we're not maybe the person at home going, gosh, I'm so lonely.
Yeah.
But we still need to think of those people.
Be considerate
and
of
be
others.
considerate of them. So when they need that time, we're willing to give it, because that 10 minutes we do that for them is like gold. For them, it's golden. Whereas for us, it was not a big deal because we've had people around us all day.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Even a text, a touch. We're relational, and when we're not having that need met, that can be overwhelming. And so thinking about her or his predicament that's trying to FaceTime you, what are they going through? Right. You may be looking for a break, and they may be looking for some connection.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because that's how God made us.
And it's exactly what the example that Christ gave us.
Exactly.
That we're not to
Exactly.
look out for ourselves, but also for the interests of others. And so
Right.
now's a good time for the church to be the church.
And you know, you
Absolutely.
said you don't really love FaceTime, and you know, a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
But I think the other day, my son was out playing basketball, and my daughter FaceTimed some of the people in our family. She FaceTimed kind of his grandmother. She's our aunt, but really his grandmother, so that she could watch him play basketball, even
Yeah.
though she couldn't be with him. And so even if we don't want to do face-to-face FaceTime, we can be creative and say, you know, that made her whole day just to kind of be in our world for a minute and not just stuck in her house.
That's a great point.
So
That's good.
Grief, pandemic, can it trigger other things? I mean, sometimes can the grief that you're experiencing today bring up some grief that you dealt with 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and how do you handle that?
You know, when we have grief on top of grief, we call that complicated grief. And,
Complicated grief.
and because we're such a busy society, a lot of times we don't have time to grieve. We're just too busy.
Right.
So if we had loss before this pandemic, now that we have loss again, it may be triggering old loss that's never been dealt with. And so you have grief upon grief. And so absolutely, that if you've never grieved, you have to grieve that, you have to go back and grieve in order to be
Wow.
normal, to be able to function and do life the way God intended us to do. Because loss is part of everybody's life. And we have to learn to go through loss. And we all grieve differently.
You bring up a good point, and you know, by the way, welcome to my counseling session as I sit here with the counselors and they're counseling me. But I'm kind of a person who I don't like to take the time to grieve.
absolutely.
And so when I go through a difficult time, my general response is to just work harder until it goes away.
Yeah.
And so having to stop actually can be painful when you stop and actually think about what you've been through and to think about how it felt.
Yeah.
So the idea of complicated grief sounds just awful, you know, because
Yeah.
it forces you to deal with things that you haven't dealt with before.
Yeah.
So I guess the question there is, what would you say to a person like me who just absolutely runs away from grief?
I think I would say that you may think you're running, but it's still in there.
Yeah.
It's still in there, and
Yeah.
it's going to find a way to surface somehow. You know, you think you're running, you think you're doing okay, but if you stop long enough and you sat down and started talking about it, the tears might come and the feelings come, and you realize, oh, I'm really not through that at all.
Yeah.
You know, but like we were talking about with the triggers, you know, for let's say a woman who has lost her husband, and maybe she has just gotten kind of on her feet to where she's in her little routine. She does her things out each day. She has lunch with her friends. You know, at night she sees her family members. She goes to church on Sunday and Wednesday. She's and that's the way she's coped, and she's doing well.
Yeah.
Well, now this with COVID-19 has brought her back into her house with the doors shut and hardly anyone coming, and so that is a trigger for, I don't have him. He's not here. And if he were here, it would be better. And so even though that's not really in essence complicated grief, because she might have really grieved him and really doing well, it just makes it glaring again, the truth of it all, that it's, you know, that the loss, it's so it's impacting them such in a deep way again.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great word. We've only got a little less than a couple of minutes left, and so I want to get to what I think probably is the most important thing that we can discuss today. And that is, you mentioned a few moments ago, phone counseling. A lot's been talked about lately in the news and whatever else about telehealth.
Right.
And so is that, first of all, what is that? And second of all, is that something that's offered at Summit Counseling? And third of all, how would I take advantage of that?
Okay.
Okay, so when telehealth is no more than video counseling.
Okay.
So just like you don't like FaceTime, that would be an example of telehealth, but you're on your computer.
Yeah.
And so you can use your phone.
Sure.
And so we use Zoom, and with the Zoom app, you can log in and you can actually talk to a counselor by video. And if you're uncomfortable with FaceTime or video, we can do phone sessions. And it's just so helpful for someone to listen and to validate your feelings. It can make all the difference in the world to just have someone that's very normalizing what you're feeling and what you're going through.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, I had thought to myself, I've had several people say to me at the end of phone sessions, wow, that went a lot better than I thought it would, or that was more effective than I thought it would be. So, you know, you really can connect through the video and the phone.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I hope that this has been helpful for you. It's been helpful for me. But we do want you to know that there is help available for you. You can contact Summit Counseling at area code 601-949-1949, or you can just send an email to jwoods, W-O-O-D-S, at fbcj.org. And though, you know, maybe you don't want to drive downtown to meet with somebody face-to-face because you want to make sure that you're social distancing, want you to know, as they've said, there are opportunities for you to talk to one of these counselors on the phone or to have a Zoom meeting with one of them. There is help available for you, but you do have a responsibility to pick up the phone or to send an email and ask for it. And so they are waiting for you. They would love to help you. So we want to let you know that that is absolutely available to you even during this difficult time. Thank you again for joining us today. Thank you all for the great words of wisdom that you've given us, and we hope to see you again next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Have a great day.